Okay, so thank you so much for joining us for Advancing Equity Through Large Unrestricted Gifts, a study of MacKenzie Scott's giving. Please note that closed captioning is available and that can be enabled at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And again, my name is Sara Lomelin. I'm the CEO of Philanthropy Together. Philanthropy Together is a global initiative to grow and strengthen the collective giving movement with programming like We Give Summit. So welcome everybody again. So today we're so incredibly excited about this session because MacKenzie Scott's large unrestricted gifts to nonprofits have shaken the whole sector, right? And I am very excited to hear what can other donors, including us everyday givers, can learn from her approach. Before I pass it to our amazing panelists, I want to remind everybody to engage in the chat. You can send your questions there, and then at the end, please stay to the end to answer a 2-question poll because we need your feedback about the session. And again, to remind you about our raffle. So at the end, one person that is on this session will get a book from one of our speakers of this year. So with that, I am very, very happy to introduce Phil Buchanan and Lysa to start this amazing conversation. Phil, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Great to be here with all of you. And I'm Phil Buchanan. I'm the president of the Center for Effective Philanthropy. And I'm joined by Lysa Ratliff, who is the CEO of Kaboom, which is an incredible organization, if you don't know of it, working on place-based inequity in this country. And Lysa is, as you will see, a really talented CEO. She took on the role in 2021, was it, Lysa?
Yeah, 2021, officially 2021.
Yeah, and had been in senior roles at Kaboom prior. I want to start just by setting the stage a little bit. So CEP, Center for Effective Philanthropy, we work to help foundations and individual donors improve their effectiveness. And we have paid a lot of attention over the past couple of decades to the fact that the percentage of grants that were unrestricted made by foundations was sort of stuck at about 20%. And the percent that were multi-year and unrestricted, much less multi-year, unrestricted, and over like a size threshold at which they might be considered large, it's very small and not changing. And we did some research in 2019, put out a report in 2020. Everything I mentioned research-wise is available on our website, cep.org, free for download, noting that foundation leaders' attitudes had shifted about general support, but the practices hadn't. Still relatively scarce in terms of unrestricted support. Then the pandemic hit, and individual donors and institutional donors alike questioned some of their default practices. And we have seen in the last few years more shifts in donor practice than we had in the previous 20. Not saying there isn't a long way to go, but a lot of change. And then enter onto the stage in the summer of 2020, MacKenzie Scott with these large unrestricted gifts. And full disclosure, Center for Effective Philanthropy was a recipient of a $10 million gift from MacKenzie Scott. And at the board meeting where I was letting our board know that this had happened, several folks said, well, we should really study this and see what happens to these organizations. And so we decided to undertake a 3-year study, and we want to talk about it today. And I think it's really important what Sarah said at the outset for the broad implications, because we're not here to say everybody should give like MacKenzie Scott, because he can't, right? Because most folks don't have those kinds of resources. But what are the lessons or insights that we can glean from what we're learning? And Lysa is going to just be in conversation with me about some of what we've learned and bring her own perspective as a leader who's been on the other side of the table from a lot of individual and institutional donors kind of help us make sense of this and draw some lessons. So let me say that obviously a lot of folks celebrated MacKenzie Scott's approach, but I can also tell you, and you on this session today may have heard some of this too, particularly at some foundations that I know well, there was a lot of kind of whispered concern, like this might not work out well. These organizations aren't going to be able to handle gifts like this. They don't have the absorptive capacity. Other funders might pull back. There might be all kinds of unintended negative consequences. And we don't know because it's early days, but that is why we wanted to study it in a rigorous way and see what we learned. So we did that with support from a lot of funders, and we put out a piece called Giving Big, the Impact of Large Unrestricted Gifts on Nonprofits. It's a report that I'll refer to throughout this conversation, and again, which you can find on our website. And it's just year one of the study. So we may learn, I know we will learn more as it goes on, but I want to start with our first finding, which was pretty simple, which is that leaders describe these gifts as absolutely transformational, not just for their organizations, but interestingly, and I think this we didn't entirely expect, for the leaders themselves. And they believe that it significantly strengthened their ability to achieve their mission. They pointed in particular to their ability to advance equity and racial equity specifically, because that can be hard to fundraise for, and this large unrestricted gift helped them to be able to do that. Leaders talked about being left in awe, not knowing what to say when they learned of the gifts, that the amount of money didn't even feel real, but that the affirmation was incredibly profound to them. And that the leaders themselves felt that the gift and the experience of receiving the gift helped them move from a scarcity to an abundance mindset, and to actually approach other potential funders in a different way. And almost all of the leaders said that it was really, really helpful in advancing mission. 2/3 also said it significantly strengthened their organization's financial stability as well as organizational capacity. None of this may be surprising at some level, but given some of the worries of gloom and doom and organizations imploding that I heard, I think it was important. And so we'll just start there with that first finding. And I would ask you, Lysa, to reflect on whether that rings true to you and what this experience of receiving a large gift from MacKenzie Scott has meant for Kaboom.
Yeah, absolutely. And Phil, thanks for having me. And thank you for also pulling together this community of philanthropic and nonprofit leaders to continue having conversations like this. And so I'll talk about my experience from the Kaboom perspective, but I also want to respect and acknowledge the experience of a lot of my peers. The other thing that I'll name and what you were describing is we were deep in the pandemic in a very unpredictable, scary environment, not knowing what the future of our organizations would look like. And so for us at Kaboom, I have been at Kaboom since 2016. I joined the organization at a time when our founder was about to pass the baton to my predecessor, who's our former CEO, really thinking about how do we scale the organization. And that was kind of the task of James, who came before me, to think about how do we stop doing one place at a time and work one system at a time. And so we had been thinking a lot about that, but we were trapped, quite frankly, we were trapped in a model where funders were restricting what we could do with funds. And so though we were doing and have always done great work and will continue to do a lot of the great work we've always done, we were trapped in this model where the gifts were restricted and we didn't have the wiggle room to really think about how we solve the problem at large. So that scaling vision that our founder had, we were kind of inching along. And I joined the organization to think about our development in a different way. So because we were reliant on one primary source of funding, which was corporations, we needed to think about how does our programmatic investments need to change so that we can tap into other sources of funding. And so then then comes a pandemic. And so what you're describing in 2021 is, us as leaders really, at Kaboom, we engage communities and volunteers to build public space. So it was like, okay, playgrounds are closed, volunteers aren't coming out. We're a healthy organization with a decent amount of reserves. And yet, what does our future look like? And how do we use this moment to really embrace the possibilities of it? And so all that pressure was on us in that moment. And when we discovered that we got a $14 million gift from MacKenzie Scott, it absolutely, without question, continues to be transformative. So on a personal level, the pressure of leading an organization and people who were really counting on stable leadership and a stable future, that burden was lifted a little bit and gave wiggle room for myself and many other leaders like me to breathe and really think about what does the future look like, and provide some reassurances to staff that, we can do what we showed up to do. We can work in a different way, and we can not hold our breaths doing it. Bigger picture, and I'll say this quickly, we can get into it a little bit later, is I've told you this before, we were ready for a big gift to come. We knew as a nonprofit, we were also trapped in a cycle where we were never going to be able to solve the problem we exist to address because of the restricted gifts. But what could it look like if we did have unlimited resources? Where would we invest? What would we do? What kind of staff and talent would we bring on board? And so we had done a lot of planning around that, but we weren't able to act on it. And so when we got this gift, that was the immediate decision. We're going to use this to give us the path to achieving our mission.
And to contextualize this a bit more, I mean, was this the biggest gift your organization had ever received?
Yes, yeah. And I think this kind of goes with what most of the findings that you had. It was at the time, because pandemic again, so our annual budget shrunk. It was about half of our annual budget, and it was just over from an individual, and certainly the biggest unrestricted gift we've ever gotten. But yes, absolutely in tune with what other nonprofits were experiencing.
Yeah, and that was the case for 80+% of the recipients that we studied for this research, which was the first year of her giving. And the median grant size was smaller than your gift, but it was $8 million. And to put that in context, the median grant at like a sort of larger staffed foundation from our data set from hundreds of foundations whose grantees we survey is $100,000. So this is 80 times the typical gift. And so just a different order of magnitude. And obviously that is really, really important for just what it offers you in terms of resources. But you've also talked with me a little bit about what it meant to you as a leader who is a Black woman. MacKenzie Scott's grantee population in terms of leadership, significantly more racially diverse than the population of foundation-funded, grantees that we have data on. So something like, I believe it's around 55% of the leaders that in the survey that we did of MacKenzie Scott's first year of giving identified as white, compared to, say, 75% at the typical foundation. And we were struck in the interviews we conducted, in addition to the survey data, 40 interviews, 20 with leaders of color, 20 with white leaders. And we were struck by the level of emotion that came through from the leaders of color in particular, so much so that we created a whole sidebar in the research report about it that we weren't expecting. Can you just chat a little bit about that, not to put you too personally on the spot here, in terms of how this affected you as an affirmation of your role as a leader?
Gosh, when you started talking about this, I almost burst into tears because it's very personal. So number one, the work as a Black woman and as an adult who benefited from a lot of our public systems. I was in Head Start. I lived in government housing. I had teen parents. The work I do is very, very personal. And I never would have imagined that I would be leading a nonprofit. Even though I've always moved, I've been working in nonprofits for the past 22 years, and I've always moved in spaces where I thought, I had authority in my role. But I also experienced an undertone, and I'm just, I don't do anything but honesty, of not being good enough, not being the profile to be able to solve problems or address issues. And how this like burns my blood, because I'm exactly the profile to address some of the issues that we're trying to solve. And so on a just very personal level, having someone call and say to me, hey, we're going to give you this gift. You don't need to do anything. How do you want it? Do you want one gift? Do you want two gifts? Do you want to be financially this healthy this year and next year? Whatever works for you. We believe in your leadership. It was it was the most powerful thing that anybody has ever said that didn't know me, in terms of investing in what was possible for me to lead. And so, multiply that by the hundreds of gifts that have been given, and having leaders who, you have this in your report, leaders who were told that there's not a lot of confidence in your leadership, that, can you take on a large gift and manage it appropriately? Having someone say, you are the very person, you have the exact experience to be able to solve problems the way we know they need to be solved. And so we're not trying to put any of our priorities or objectives on you. You do it. In a lot of ways, it created a monster, because it's like, yes, I can do this. We can do this. But it was very validating. I will say it's very validating. And I know we get into the later findings, but it's also not enough. Like it needs to start tipping us toward, we see you, and we acknowledge that the most important thing in our world right now is to fix these problems that we've inherited. So we have a history of a system and wealth that was built on the backs of other people and designed for some people to be wealthy. We've all inherited that. No one is at fault. It's what we've inherited. And so having someone say, it's going to take all types to fix this problem, is just a starting point. And I think we need a lot more of it.
Thank you, Lysa. Thank you for that. And I do want to get to what you alluded to, which is, how are folks using the funds, and how, in my view, the data about that actually, calls into question some of the caricatures and stereotypes people have about nonprofit leaders and their thoughtfulness about allocation of resources. But before I go there, I do want to just underscore, this issue of the personal effect on you as a woman of color, just by sharing one other quote from the report, which I think really struck us. This is someone we interviewed who said, I'm coming into an industry where I've been told about 2 million times that organizations led by women of color get less than others. And I know that for a fact. It happens, this person says, even in her for-profit work prior to being in the nonprofit sector. So I was nervous, she says, because I'm thinking, man, I hope that who I am doesn't cheat this organization out of opportunities, and that's a sad thing to even admit to you, but I did think that. So I just found that to be profound and obviously sad. And share your hope, Lysa, that the mindsets really shift here. And then when we look at folks' use of these resources, and I want to segue to that. So this is our second finding. And again, it's early days, and if I'm proven wrong over time, I'll be the first to admit it. But what we saw was no problem on the part of leaders in terms of figuring out how to allocate these resources, and that they're using them to improve and expand existing programmatic work. So that's a big use of the funds, and that's about new programmatic initiatives. It's about increasing the constituents who are served. It's about improving existing work. It's about partnerships. But we also see folks using the resources to shore up their finances, investing in reserves, creating endowments in some cases, starting a special fund for strategic opportunities. And then we see them investing in internal capacity. And that looks like, in some cases, improving salaries or benefits, particularly for folks on the lower end of the scale, addressing pay equity issues. It's about hiring staff to take on new work. It's about upgrading technological infrastructure. Those are just some examples. And everybody pretty much is doing some of all of those things, right? So people did not, spend it all in one place. They thoughtfully allocated across different areas, sort of taking the long view. And there isn't a lot of cause for concern, I think, yet in those findings. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how you thought about it. You said you had a strategy and you were basically able to just put the resources behind that strategy.
Yeah. So this where I'll talk a lot about Kaboom, because I think it is a narrative on what other nonprofits have been trying to, like, how we've been able to shift because of the gift. And so we're about 27 years old, and we've been working for most of our history in like one at a time. So waiting for funding to come into the door, getting about $120,000 to build one playground, or, a generous partner who says, I'm going to build 10 playgrounds with you. So I'll give you, just over $1 million to build those 10, but here's the parameters. And then us figuring out how do we do the work behind it. And you think about, we exist for something that we think is one of the most important things that we could possibly invest in, which is our kids. And so our kids, their currency is play. We all know that you're healed through play, you learn through play, you negotiate through play. Like, if we design for our kids, they will take care of us better later. Like, we will inherit a better planet and a better system. So one at a time was never enough for us. And so we had always been talking about, at least since I've been here for 7 years, what could it look like if we had a path to achieving our mission? So if our mission is ending place-based inequity for good, and we do that by engaging the very community that will use that space, the kids and the adults and the caregivers, to tell us what they need, what could it look like if we weren't restricted to just doing one project at a time? And that meant a lot of transformation. That meant that we, one, had to have a better understanding of where there's place spaces and where there's not. Making sure that we are overlaying it with an equity lens, looking at census data, looking at transportation data, just looking at what's really going on in our country in terms of the built infrastructure for kids. And we didn't have that. We didn't have that at all, because we were relying on $120,000 at a time to build one playground at a time. We knew that our relationship with communities had to be strengthened. So if we are truly solving the problem in a way that communities feel heard and feel like they will utilize that space, then that means some nature-based play. That means some multi-generational places. That means some adventure courses, stuff that just was not in our blueprint. We would also have to influence our federal, state, local government to prioritize outdoor space, to reallocate budget, to think about the decisions they make with equity in mind. We didn't have the infrastructure to do any of that, but we knew that it was all necessary to achieve our mission. And so getting this gift allowed us to say, you know what, we're going to start investing in this. Number one, we've hired 28 new people in the last 18 months. We are going to hire the talent that will tell, we're going to have a strong M&E function that tells us where are the play spaces that need to be built on the front end? What are the outcomes of the work? Because we did the work, We're going to hire an individual to lead that and grow that team. Fundamental to achieving our mission, and yet we didn't have it. There was no mechanism to say, if you're looking at this country and you need to figure out where we need to invest in places to play, there was no mechanism to do it. So we had to invest in that. So we had I won't get all into the detail, but we had all of the areas that needed investment, but we only were operating off of a very small margin of funds, and we're never able to invest in them. So the minute we got the $14 million, we put most of the resources into building out our government affairs and policy team, to our measurement and evaluation team, and to strengthening our ability to build partnerships with community and peer organizations, as well as our public systems.
And on that last point, I mean, everything you said, while you were saying it, got me thinking about, and a lot of what we're doing here, I think, is myth busting, right? All the times that I've heard folks say, why don't nonprofits do X more or better, right? And it's often donors who are saying this, not always. And often the answer is because they're not capitalized to be able to do that. And on this last point you made about collaboration, I mean, how many times have we all heard folks say, well, you know, folks should work in collaboration more, but actually you need to have the stability financially, resources, people, mind space to be able to do that. And one of the interesting insights that came through, again, in our interviews, and we also highlight this in the report, is that folks did feel that they were better able to collaborate following receipt of this gift. I want to encourage you to submit your questions as we turn to the third finding. And you know, this one's quick because it's just so simple. A lot of folks said, and this one I'm gonna own that I worried about it too. Are other donors going to pull back and say, oh, they're fine, they don't need resources from us? That felt like a real thing to worry about. And I think actually it led some organizations to not want to even share the specific amount of funding that they received. Like you, Lysa, we were very just open about it. We told everybody because we figured they're going to find out sooner or later, and transparency is a value of ours. But I know some folks worried about that. But what we saw is that folks were more likely to say that their fundraising increased and to believe that this was helpful than hurtful in terms of their fundraising. Were there isolated examples where somebody said, yeah, I do think this funder, you know, may have pulled back a little bit? Yes, but they were outnumbered by examples where people said, we think this funder actually came in because of the support we got from MacKenzie Scott, the imprimatur it offered. And folks talked about approaching fundraising differently and more strategically after they had these resources. So Lysa, does that ring true to you, or did you have other funders who said, oh, you're fine, you don't need us anymore?
Yeah, so we didn't have funders that say you're fine, you don't need us, because you know the problem we're trying to fix has a much bigger budget than $14 million. So no, that did not happen. But what I'm kind of like going through right now is a misconception that okay, you got $14 million, and so here's all the playgrounds that you're going to build. And this is coming from funders. We got $14 million, which allowed us to strengthen the foundation of change and transformation, to work with public systems, to work with the federal government, to do our work in a way that really responded to what communities tell us that they need. And so it's allowed us to change, but there is a little bit of an energy out there. We have stronger partnerships than ever, but an energy out there that doesn't recognize, okay, we build infrastructure. We still need money to build the infrastructure. And so the investments that we need are much larger than they've ever been before. So we still battle that a little bit, but certainly no one was saying, oh, you guys are good, we'll go and give our funds to somewhere else. It actually strengthened our reputation. And the other thing that I'll say, and it links back to point 2 a little bit, we're making commitments to leaders at the White House. The White House has the challenge to end hunger and build healthy communities. We would have never been able to bring a partner to the table and say, we're going to participate in this. I'm meeting with school superintendents who are literally changing their mindset around what their outdoor space could do, because all they had thought about before was the bricks and mortar and what was happening inside the class. I would not have had the space, and we would have not have had the functions within our organization to do that kind of work that is really the transformative work. And so, no, we're not having funders say to us, you guys are good, we're going to go somewhere else. I think our funders are double downing and saying to us, you know what, we want to be part of solving this problem with you. But there is a little bit of something happening underneath the surface that I want to make sure funders understand for all of us, whether you're supporting Kaboom, CEP, or anybody else, is that a lot of this funding allowed us to invest in the transformation that should have always been there in the first place. And that the real work is what is ahead of us that requires continued investment in doing, in writing the course that we've changed.
That's great. Thank you, Lysa. And so we will turn in a minute to some of the questions and also some of the critiques of MacKenzie Scott. I do want to say, though, that I think that something fundamental about her approach is related to what you were just talking about, Lysa, which is a belief that the strength of organizations matter to be there for the long term and able to respond to what happens, which is a bit of a different mindset than some of the focus of donors in the past 20 years who sometimes will say to me things like, really, they do. Some of you are not going to believe this, but we don't actually care about the organizations. We just care about the impact. And so we're not interested in their capacity or, capacity building or any of that, as if somehow the two could be separated, as if strong programs can exist in weak organizations, right? It doesn't really make sense. And I think there's a lot of binary thinking here too, like a sense that either you're strategic and outcomes oriented and impact focused, or you're trust-based and, supporting organizations, when in fact, the latter helps to achieve the former, right? So anyway, that's just a reflection on sort of why I think her approach has sort of had the ripple that it has, is because it has challenged some of the prevailing norms in philanthropy.
Yeah, for sure. And, I spent a big part of my career in development, building, solid, strong, long-term friendships and relationships with a lot of the same kind of funders you're talking about. And that mindset is real. I do think that there's something underneath this, though. If you think about the history of our country, this is a country that was designed and built on kind of an approach that would allow a subset of the population to thrive and the rest to kind of be there at the service of others. And then we got to a place where philanthropy kicked in, but it really on an individual level was about that those individuals' priorities or what they cared about versus let me turn back and offer contributions that help fix a bigger problem. It's, I care about nature, I care about the earth, so I'm going to focus all of my philanthropy on the earth, which is somebody has the right to do that. But the missing piece is, I don't know how to fix that problem. I care about that problem, but I don't know how to fix that problem. And what I think has happened, whether it's an individual or a corporation, is it's not just about me saying, I don't really care about the other stuff the nonprofit is doing, I want them to do this. It's, I have my own priorities. as a corporation, I've got my pillars of giving that are important, and I've got to report back to our shareholders, and we're growing our business. There's like, that's real, that exists. And on a foundation side, and especially a family foundation, the motivation for it is personal and individualized. And so I think that there's more than just saying, I don't know if I'm articulating this well, but I think there's more than just saying, I don't care about the nonprofit beyond what I'm giving to them. It's more, I have my priorities, and I need to make sure that what I'm giving to you and the work that you're doing aligns with my priorities. And MacKenzie Scott, I think, is beautiful because one of the things, I wrote it down, she said, she talks about giving her wealth back to the society who helped generate it. And if we could have that as the kind of fundamental foundational belief versus I'm going to give my philanthropy back to, people who are focused on the future of the planet or kids, because that's what I care about. And so make that happen. I don't care if it's dependent on you doing 3 other things. I need you to make that happen. We have to have that kind of fundamental shift in saying, I'm wealthy, I built this wealth, or I'm a successful corporation. We need to give back to the people that helped us build this wealth in an unrestricted way, and know that they have dependencies that are beyond what my priorities might be.
Yeah, that's good.
I think we need to make sure that we're touching on that, because it's not just me saying, I want you to do X, not Y. It's, I have priorities, and I need to make sure that my priorities are being addressed in yours. We've got to stop doing that.
Yeah. I used to think a lot about this question of like, who really has the answers? Like, why do donors or foundations in a conference room with consultants from McKinsey or wherever think that they've got the answers to a community's problem without talking to that community and seeing? But it's more than that. It's like, what even is the challenge or problem or priorities? Let's not assume that we know. And let's think about who gets to answer that question, is what I hear you saying, Lysa.
Yeah. And even on a very individual level, to recognize that it is so much more important to be of service to others than to be served by your own deeds. And that's unselfish giving. Yeah,
that's great. So let's go to one of the questions that's in the chat, and just to back way up, as context for the question, which is about the open call from MacKenzie Scott. If we go back to, I believe it was December of 2021, but the years are all blending together. There was a moment in time where MacKenzie Scott said, this time I'm not going to publicize this latest round. And then there were various folks, and I admit I was one, who said, like, it's better if you're public about this stuff. I don't know what prompted then a decision to create a website and make it public. I think that was probably in the works before all that. And then there was this question of, well, what if I am a person, and I think, Lysa, you and I both know folks like this, who can't figure out why we didn't get one, and I can think of some great leaders of organizations working in spaces that MacKenzie Scott seems to be funding, who for reasons they cannot understand were not a recipient of a gift. So then fast forward to more recently, this announcement of an open call for organizations between $1 and $5 million budget size. And I think there's been some critique of that. And I think that critique is in the question, which is that, that is a high threshold, rather, the 1 million, given how many organizations, important organizations in communities, have budgets that are under $1 million. So Lysa, I don't know if you've given this much thought, but any reflections on the one hand, it seems like a positive step to try to create more of an open process, a window in for people who might not know otherwise how to get noticed. On the other hand, it is excluding a lot of organizations with budgets below that threshold.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I'll try and condense. One, I do think that as nonprofits, we have the responsibility to have a clear path to achieving our mission. Just because there's funders out there who are giving away money like MacKenzie Scott, we should never have an expectation that, oh, hey, contribute some of that funding to me. We've got work to do to make sure that we have a path to transformation, even if we can't do it right now. So I think that is important for us to acknowledge that it's not, there is a relationship here, that there is shared accountability on the nonprofit and on the philanthropic side. With MacKenzie Scott, I think we need to, you and I talked about this before, and I think we were kind of like debating, but I think we've got to, unless somebody out there knows her and knows kind of what's going on and has a crystal ball, what's going to happen in the next 3 years, we've got to be careful here. Because, this is a woman who has pledged to give her wealth away as fast as she can in her lifetime. And what I'm witnessing happening is she's doing this in stages. And so who knows what tomorrow brings? And it almost feels like she's trying to open up the aperture a little bit in very thoughtful and intentional ways. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to be like, give her a break. Here's another way for a bigger community of nonprofits to be able to be seen and to be heard, to be considered for gifts. Who knows what the next wave will look like? And so I'm really careful about, saying too much, because we don't know what's going to happen next with her rounds of giving. I do think that, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of peer organizations that I'm like, hey, look at them. They're doing great work. They are worthy of investment. But there's a lot of philanthropy out there. And so look at them, large foundation, small foundation, wealthy billionaire. There's 10, top 10 billionaires, only one woman on this list, but there's a lot of resources out here beyond MacKenzie Scott. And so, as we're thinking about other nonprofits that didn't get MacKenzie Scott funding, there's also other funders out there that should be giving them the same kind of gifts. And so I just, I'm always of the mindset of, let's be careful about how much we pick apart her approach to giving, because she has committed on the front end to spend the rest of her life giving her wealth away. We don't know what next year will look like. And bravo to her for changing things along the way rather than just using the same script.
Yeah, right. And let's not hold someone to a higher standard than we're holding folks who have done, next to nothing, relatively speaking, philanthropically. Right. So I think I really hear your point. And one of the things, as I think there may be a couple more questions, and as we get our heads around those, I do want to ask Lysa if you can help me, just real quick, think about this audience of folks, right, who are giving often at sort of whatever we want to call it, everyday amounts. Just you and me pushing ourselves to think about what are the lessons here that apply to anyone. So one that comes to mind for me is you can actually prioritize equity in the way that you give. And if you care about equity, you have to prioritize it and make sure that you're disciplined about that. Another one that sort of comes to my mind is just about, with all this sort of disparagement that people do of nonprofits and their people, actually, we can support the people in nonprofits by giving in certain ways, by giving in unrestricted ways and giving as big as we can when we can. Anything else, Lysa, that come to your mind as something you would hope, folks who are in a giving circle on a particular issue might be able to take as a lesson from MacKenzie Scott?
Mm-hmm. So this is a little bit different than MacKenzie Scott, and I think she's a
Yeah.
little bit different than most philanthropic donors, but commit, and I think, what I mean by commit is commit to learning and listening and recognizing that there's probably a lot more to the problem that you care about than you understand. And so like really digging into like, what are the roots of this problem? Where are my resources best contributed? And how do I utilize my wealth and my life to support other people who are doing this work? Not just, hey, I'm going to give you $50,000 this year or $100,000 this year and use it in XYZ way. It's, you know what, I want to help you. And I want to make sure that my resources are helping you in the best possible way. I'm willing to give you a gift. I want to follow you. I want to stay with you. I want to find others to support you. Like just, if we're going to do this work, let's do this work. There's a lot on the line in terms of the health of society and our future. And so this old mindset of writing a check and a tax deduction and it aligning with our priorities, it's just not enough. Like we've got complex problems to solve. So making a real commitment that is grounded in, I want something to change. And I know that I'm not the one to do it, but I have the means to support someone else doing it. Let me figure out how I can best be a partner in that. I think just like being open to thinking in a different way and supporting in a different way is really important for the everyday funder.
That's great. I think we've got like something like 60 seconds left here before Sarah comes back. I did see a question about collaboration and mergers. It's a really big question. I think the thing that I would just offer up, just so we don't let any question go unanswered, is to point back to the fact that the folks who received gifts from MacKenzie Scott did find that it helped them to be able to be more collaborative. It gave them the strength and space to be able to do that. And then the question also refers to mergers, which sometimes make sense. I would like to say that I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it's sometimes the very smallness and community rootedness of an organization that makes it effective because it has a level of trust. And so I think we talk about scale a lot, but we have to remember that small actually can be beautiful from an effectiveness and impact point of view. I think I'm supposed to be wrapping up, and I would like to say to you, Lysa, just thank you so much for sharing, your candid sort of personal and organizational perspective and talking this over. I think it's way more interesting to hear from somebody who's actually doing the work every day than somebody like me who's just kind of studying it in my wonky way. And I wanted to ask you, Lysa, if you have a final thought before Sarah closes us out.
Yeah, no, just thank you. I think on MacKenzie Scott's Yield site, she talks about, just giving big, giving till it hurts. And I saw someone in the comments talk about the giving pledge and the, people who are part of the giving pledge, their wealth is just growing. Let's do this work until it hurts so much that it feels good. So I would leave with that. Like if not us, who, we've got a big weight on our shoulders, let's lift it together.
Thank you, Lysa. Sarah.
Thank you so much, Phil and Lysa. This was incredible. And I stayed with, trust and commitment, right? Let's commit. Let's commit, when all of us, everyday givers, everyday philanthropists, to commit fully to the causes that we care about and to the organizations that we care about. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your wisdom. Phil, incredible study, and keep doing it, because we are big fans of the work that you do at the Center of Effective Philanthropy. And Lysa, thank you so much for keeping it real. Thank you. Okay, so before we wrap up, please remember everyone to answer our 2-question poll before exiting this meeting. The poll is going to launch right now. And in the next few days, you are going to be able to have this recording on the We Give Summit website. The winner of today's raffle is Stephen Michael Thompson Jr. So our staff is going to reach out to you so you can pick the book that you want. And thank you again for joining us. We look forward to see you at the next session. The next session is how to share power with grantees through co-creation. And it's we're going to hear from people at Global Giving, so don't miss it. And come early because, you know, we're going to have the incredible Ed Sachs playing for us a little bit. So thank you and see you in a few minutes.